Welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. Here's an age-old question and debate. Can money buy happiness? Many of you watching and listening here have likely heard of this notion before, been asked it before, maybe even asked yourself this question. And I want to talk about it today because our last show, we went through the concept of the differences between being rich versus being wealthy. And I got a lot of feedback and a lot of comments on that episode that I really wanted to go deeper into the research for you and actually talk about some of these things. Maybe even add some empirical data to support some of these things, because the bridge I made in our last episode around the terms rich versus wealthy, which again sounds familiar, but are actually very different with regards to joy and happiness, really contentment versus complacency. So again, we're gonna talk about that today more in depth on our show. But before we get started, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. So in my research over this past week or so, I wanted to really focus on some empirical data. And there were two well-known studies from Princeton University and from the University of Pennsylvania. And they were actually, at the time when they first came out, were contrasting studies. But both of these researchers got together and basically reanalyzed, if you will, their previous survey data. And their paper was published in March of this year. And for the proceedings, by the way, it was published in the National Academy of Sciences Journal. And the researchers found on this subject matter of can money buy you happiness, they found that both of their earlier studies contained significant truths, but missed surprisingly two effects that are key factors that I want to bring up to you. Basically, they missed baseline happiness, or what we know as unhappiness, okay? So you might be thinking, okay, so how can both conclusions of these two be true of two contrasting studies, right? One saying money can buy you happiness, and one saying that money cannot buy happiness. And they eventually arrived at a two-part hypothesis. Number one is there is an unhappy minority whose unhappiness diminishes with rising income up to a threshold. Think Eeyore here, all right? Then shows, by the way, no further progress past that. If they're just sad, they're just sad, okay? And then number two is the happier majority of people, happiness continues to rise with income, even in the high range of incomes. This debunks Jay-Z's theory, by the way, of more money, more problems. I digress. Friends, I could have told you this from 20 years of being a financial advisor. I've showed this many times before. In fact, I shared it in the last episode, which money really doesn't change you, it illuminates who you already are. Now, I hate to sound redundant on that, but I feel like on both of these topics, it's important to note. If you're an angry person and you add more money, guess what? You're probably gonna still be angry. And it's not going to alleviate your anger. If you're a giving person, more money, you're likely going to be more of a giver. Conversely, if you're not necessarily, your heart isn't about giving, you're more of a selfish, which again, not right or wrong, just because you have more money doesn't mean all of a sudden you're gonna go into this being a giver person, okay? It illuminates who you already are. So these two empirical studies going into this is something I've experienced firsthand in 20 years of being an advisor. Now, I wanna go further though, because their actual results came in and said that generally speaking, more money means happier people. Now, I wanna stop here for a second because I think it's really important to note that when you bring up the subject matter of more money, more problems, or you bring up the subject matter of more money can bring happiness, a wise person once told me that more money relieves my stress and therefore can actually bring happiness. And so I might be bringing to you empirical data and studies here, but we all know for ourselves who we are. And if money can alleviate stress, that's a good thing, but it's making sure that our identity is not found in money, because our identity needs to be found elsewhere. And that's where joy, happiness, and contentment lies. Now, by the way, in this study, back to the study, the majority of participants, their happiness as self-reported rose in a straight line with their income without any stopping at any particular income threshold. Now, among this group in this study, roughly 30% of people were the quote unquote happiest, and they actually experienced accelerating levels of happiness. Now, as their earnings rose above $100,000, the study then contends that happiness keeps rising up to an annual earnings of at least $500,000. Now, the surprising takeaway to me is that unlike the old adage says that people generally in this study, okay, based on their empirical data, became happier as they made more money. And the happiest people by temperament tend to enjoy life as they climb the income ladder, even more than the average person. But wait, there's one big exception here. One caveat to these results, and Killingsworth, the original researcher from Princeton, explained, actually in a recent interview that I was reading, that the exception is people who are financially well off but unhappy. Remember that Eeyore I was talking about? So there's 20% of people that fall into this group, of which extra income over that $100,000 threshold per year in the study didn't measurably increase their happiness. The researchers then ultimately concluded that money beyond that income threshold can't really overcome things like deep abiding pain, which by the way includes grief, maybe clinical depression, anxiety, heartbreak. And as Killingsworth said, if you're rich and miserable, more money won't help. Friends, I've experienced that so often in 20 years. And we may ask this old adage, this old age question time and time again, but I'll share this. It's important to look within. If we find our identity and self-worth in something like money or anything else material for that matter, it's not going to change who you already are. It's just you have to change within. And I think the notion of becoming financially free, the empowerment, the growth can give you, that you'll get, by the way, through discipline in something like investing, can tend to help us get out of certain areas in our brain and our psychology that we might not be able to get out of ourselves. So the idea of growth or more money isn't to me the empirical data that I would focus on. I would focus on if you can be content with yourself and have discipline within any area or any arena of your life, particularly, by the way, in something as important as allowing yourself to be financially free. Ultimately, your joy and happiness and contentment will align with that growth. I hope you enjoyed our show today. If you did, make sure to subscribe to our show so you don't miss a single episode. And always remember to make your money matter.